Hi everyone. Hi there. Welcome. Welcome to the talk show powered by English for AT and Tomas Kelly tonight. Hi everyone. Hey there and hi Thomas. Thomas, how's it going today?
Hello, Julia. How's it going? Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Awesome. Of course, I'm very excited about our conversation, and hopefully, this is going to be an eye opener or at least a talk show full of eye openers for our audience, for our students, or just for everyone who just joined or going to join the stream. I suggest that we start with a little sound check. So, let's see if everyone can see and can hear us very well. So, you guys, please leave your reactions in the comment section. Just say yes or give us your thumbs up if you can hear and see us, and that means that we can get started. And if for some reason you cannot see us, you cannot hear us, please let us know. Hi there. Okay.
Getting some
Alrighty.
responses now, Julia, I think.
Okay, already.
Yeah.
Always okay. Good to go. Good
Yeah.
to go. Amazing. Now, I guess that's the right moment to get started because without further ado, we need to introduce ourselves and then introduce the agenda and start discussing a very important topic here. Awesome. Great. So, if for some reason we haven't met before, my name is Julia. I'm a business development manager at English for AT. English for AT is an online school where we teach tech professionals, also those who work in digital media worldwide. We teach them English and soft skills so they can get a new or maybe their first job in tech, or they can get promotion or just get better career in tech. That's why I'm very excited to be talking to Thomas, to interview Tomas Kelly, one of the very professional and experienced recruiting professionals, recruiting managers. And hi, Thomas. Thank you a lot for coming today.
Yes, thanks so much for having me as well, Julia.
So how about I start with a quick story? I have a question for everyone here. How do you think, guys, where Thomas and I met? Probably that's going to be an interesting story. Maybe we met at a networking event. Maybe that was LinkedIn or I don't know, Tinder, whatever. So, what do you think? Where did we meet? Because I think that's an interesting story behind it. So, just share your suggestions. Take a wild guess. Okay, well, this is a quick story saying that Thomas and I met on LinkedIn. It was me. I reached out to Thomas. We were discussing workforce development training for his team, for Googlers, right? But eventually, we ended up discussing this talk show for you. And I call it, power of LinkedIn or power of network, power of new connections, right? Once you connect with someone on LinkedIn, for example, you never know what you can do with this person, right? And you never know where they can lead you. So maybe this is one of the tips that Thomas is going to share today about how to get into FAANG, right? How to work in these companies, or maybe that's important to care about your LinkedIn profile if you prepare for a job interview, right? So, Thomas, thanks again for coming. I'm so excited about our chat today. And over to you now. I'm really sure that our audience wants to know something about you. So, go ahead.
Yes. So thank you again for the introduction, Julia. And for those, I suppose, on the live stream that don't know me, so hi, my name is Thomas. So I'm a HR and recruitment professional with over 10 years of experience in the industry. After completing my master's in human resources, I joined Google, where I worked in a number of different positions and was most recently a people manager. So I was leading the cloud customer experience recruiting team. I'm an active contributor, as you might see on my LinkedIn. I've got 28,000 followers and just generally have a passion for HR and career coaching as well. Um, to sort of go through the introduction here, I've made things a bit simple and just put a few different logos or also national symbols on the slide, and I'll just give you a bit of context and a bit of background to myself. So I'm originally from Dublin in Ireland. My accent has gone somewhat neutral, as you probably have noticed, but you might hear a little bit of it coming out now and again. I finished my bachelor's in 2009. The Great Recession had just hit. To give some perspective and to put a number behind it, the unemployment rate at the time was over 14%. But the unemployment rate actually for people under the age of 25 was 25%. So it was a tough time to try and find a new job. But with that, it gave me an opportunity to really think about what I'd like to do. And one of the things actually was human resources. I had studied a bit in my final year of my bachelor's, and then decided to undertake rather a master's in the subject, and that leads on to the second bubble there, which is the National College of Ireland, which is where I completed my master's. Just before completing this, I was fortunate enough to get a phone call from Google. Many calls later, many interviews later. I think I did 6 or 7 interviews at the time, as it shows you how long we've come. Was fortunate enough to get offered a position there, which was fantastic. I honestly, I must admit, I couldn't believe my luck when I got the call, and I really just committed to just giving it my all, and I really felt like I did just that at the company. Moving on to the fourth bubble. So in 2016, I moved to Switzerland with Google, also changed roles at the same time as well, and have been based here ever since that. And in my most recent my most recent role rather at Google, I was a people manager and leading the cloud customer recruiting team. And this is also where I really grew a passion for building high performance teams and for coaching, and also just helping others, helping professionals, on their journey. And that kind of covers off the last bubble there.
That's very impressive, and that's a great introduction, right? Which is a great example for everyone. Well, I have one question. You mentioned that it was luck, right? Well, when you joined Google, right? That was a lucky call, fortunate call. Was it really luck, or did you work hard? Was it hard work that paid off?
So I'll kind of start answering the question by giving an interesting statistic. Now, this may have changed slightly, but at the time, there was a statistics that said that one in every 130 applicants would be hired at Google. So you've got less than 1% of a chance. So just giving some perspective on that, and that's why I felt a little bit lucky. But I think it was a combination of, yes, definitely some hard work. I had done a lot of interviews just prior to interviewing at Google, and for whatever reason, none of them worked out. So I'd actually done I got quite a good bit of experience there. And I think I was kind of very much just setting myself up for success as much as possible. So to answer your question, Julia, I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah, great. All right. Noted. Awesome. Well, I have also questioned the same or similar question to our audience. Again, yes or no answers, very short, will work here. I'm just curious if someone here wants to work in FAANG, in Facebook, or maybe we call that not FAANG at the moment, but MAN, because it's not Facebook, but Meta, right? So does anyone here want to work for Facebook or Meta, right? Amazon, Apple, Netflix, or Google. Is this your, dream job? Is this what you really want to have in your future? Does it mean that you are very successful in your career, right? If you land a job in FAANG companies. So, yes or no? Again, please share your answers. So we'll see if you have such a dream. And in the meantime, Thomas, why does everyone want to work in FAANG? What's special about these companies?
It's a really good question. I think it's different for different for everyone, different depending on who you're speaking to. But what we've put together, I suppose, on this slide is maybe just a few things to sort of talk about maybe what it's like to work in a FAANG company. And maybe this might then feed into that question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the first thing is around the culture. So the culture, by and large, within these companies, it's always grounded in a few key principles. So it will differ slightly by company, but in general, the culture is built on putting the user or the customer first, collaboration amongst teams, solving problems collaboratively, and building great products or services. Second thing is people. Personally, this is one thing that I love throughout my time at Google. You get the opportunity to work with others who are really passionate about what they do. They want to do impactful work, but they also really want to collaborate. They want to solve problems together. The
Okay.
next is sorry. Yeah, if you have a question, please feel free to interject. The next is the work. So the work is generally split between sort of your core work. So for example, if you're a software engineer, coding, or maybe for recruiters, it's recruiting, and then some project work as well. So it's usually sort of like an 80-20 split between the two, depending on how busy you are and what time of the year. So sometimes we'll be busier than others, if that makes sense. It is a lovely blend, and I feel that it really keeps the work that you do very interesting.
All
The next
right.
thing is sorry, Julie, go ahead. I
No,
interrupted.
I just wanted to ask here. Maybe also we'll have similar questions from the audience, but there are lots of other companies worldwide, right? Not that Titanic, giant companies, but anyways, even startups. They also develop this culture, right? Also, they have workforce development for their employees, so they do just a lot for their teams, right? They care about work-life balance. They care about career development, right, of each employee. So does it mean that these FAANG companies are number one, right? And this is the ultimate goal for everyone?
It's a tough question, if I'm being honest, Julia,
I'm
because
sorry. We should have
sorry, excuse
prepared
me. Because it depends on the aspiration of the individual, right? I think if we're to talk about it in generic or general terms, I don't know if this is the place that everybody wants to work at, but I would say that they are quite popular, right? And there are a certain number of people who do want to work there.
All right. Yeah, makes sense now. Great. And now we're going to speak more about how to get a job in FAANG, right? Obviously, the very first step is a job interview, right? This job interview process. Again, is this job interview process different if you had it in a different company, right? Or just at least if you compare Amazon and Google, right? Again, is the job process different or not?
It's a good question. I think there are going to be some differences in how companies will sort of bring candidates through the process, but I think there's a lot of similarities, both in terms, I think, of the number of the interviews and sort of how they assess candidates. So to give you an example, a lot of the tech companies, when they're hiring software engineers, they'll have a similar process, right? So Google, for example, usually at different stages, you will have an interview whereby you're given access to a shared document. You'll be given a problem. You'll be asked then to code the solution into that document, and the interviewer can see that solution as well in real time. That's something I think that a lot of the big tech companies do. So again, there are some similarities. The other thing I'd say is that by and large, tech companies try and make sure that they have a fair and equitable process globally. So it
Mhm.
doesn't really matter what country you're in. If you're going for a particular role somewhere, you know there should be a sort of a fair and equitable process. Yes, there will always be some roles which have a certain specialism, maybe, let's say, so the process might be slightly different. But generally speaking, it should be the same, no matter what.
Yeah, so the structure obviously is the same. Fair enough
Yeah.
here. And I always say that job interviews, they are not a brain surgery, right? So it must be fun for everyone, but not. Instead, a lot of people, they worry, they feel anxious, right? They feel nervous before the job interview, not only 5 minutes before, but just 2 weeks before this job interview. And if it is a job interview in FAANG, so it's 2x more, more about panic. So we were hoping to get your tips, right? Your maybe your personal, your secrets or your insights on how to prepare for a job interview mentally,
Yeah.
right? And maybe what we need to know, what we need to take into account before a
Yeah.
job interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And one tip I would just give just before I start is that these points that I'm going to go through, they're actually relevant to most job interviews. It's not
Oh,
just
mhm.
FAANG in this case. So yeah, so let me start to kind of go through them. So the first one is job opening research. So it's really good to make sure you understand what the job responsibilities are by reviewing the job posting on the careers page. If you happen to know anyone who works at the company, maybe there's somebody in your network on LinkedIn, for example, it's worthwhile speaking to them just to get an idea of, okay, this is the role, this is the responsibilities, this is the day to day, and do I like that, right? Is this something I think that aligns with my career aspirations? Second thing is know the interview process and structure. So when you're chatting with a recruiter, so hopefully when you've applied to the role, you receive a response by email, they set up a call. And when you're having that initial call with the recruiter, make sure you're clear on what the interview process looks like and what the structure is like. And also how long will it take and what comes next. So, okay, this is the entire process. We're speaking about this part today. This is what's coming next then, so you're clear. The recruiter will usually cover this in the recruiter screening, as I said, and also share some documentation, maybe like a PDF or something. If they don't, make sure you ask for it. More than likely, they do have something to share and maybe just forgot to share it with you. Depending on the role, companies will usually have somewhere between kind of 3 to 5, maybe 3 to 6 interviews, and which cover a mix of role-related knowledge, problem solving or cognitive ability, and also culture add. So Google was renowned for having an interview which focused on Googliness and leadership, and that was sort of like our example of these Google ad a type of interview. The next tip I give is think out loud and organize your thoughts. This is probably one of the most common tips that I give out, Julia. And it's really good. Think out loud, organize your thoughts to, when you're answering questions. Tech companies in particular are really interested in your analytical skills, your thought process, and your problem solving ability. They want to see you reach the solution, but they also want to see how did you reach that solution? How did you come to that conclusion ultimately? This is important as it shows them how you might approach similar problems in the role which you're applying for. So think out loud and really try to guide the interviewer through your thought process. Next thing is,
so it's not the exam, right? You probably need to over communicate during a job interview, right? Just say even more.
It depends, I suppose, on which role you're going for. Like some people will be used to over communicating, maybe so others won't be. But I think by and large, yes, I would over communicate in this case
Okay.
and really try and organize your thoughts as much as you can. So just 2 more points to go through. So next one is practice. So I can't say this enough. Practice, practice, practice. There are plenty of sample questions on the internet for a lot of these different positions across the companies. Take these, try them out, and time yourself as well. Don't forget, each interview has a time limit, usually about 45 minutes. When you break it down, it means per question, you've got maybe a few minutes to answer this. So try and time yourself. Also, you can practice in many different ways. You can, use your iPhone or whatever it might be, or your laptop, record yourself, and maybe ask a friend or family member if you can do a quick role play, but try and replicate what the environment will be as much as possible. And the last thing then, follow up. So when the interview is completed, like after each step or when the entire process is completed, it's best practice. Follow up the next day with the recruiter, share your thoughts, hey, the interview went well, or, oh, I feel like I bombed the entire thing. Maybe you won't select me or whatever it might be. But tell them how you felt it went and ask them, when can I expect the next update? So both of you are clear in terms of expectations. It's good to get that clarity. I've seen a lot of cases where there's just kind of radio silence, and neither side knows what's going on, and to a certain extent. So it's always good to do that and just follow up as much as possible.
All right. Okay. Great. Yeah, I also wanted to maybe add this number 6 point that you also mentioned. So probably that was your 6th tip is about asking questions, right? Ask a lot of questions, probably during the job interview, right? Or at the end when, of course, usually recruiters, the end, right? The session with what questions do you have for me today, right? And do job candidates always ask you questions, or do they say no, I don't have any questions at the moment?
Yeah, so really, really good question to ask. And also just to point out, I was going to actually cover this point a little bit later in the presentation, but happy to go through it now as well. I'd say the majority of candidates do ask questions. Yes, either about what's been my own experience like, how long will the process take, when can I expect an update, and who will I speak with, do you have any tips, you know, various things like that. So by and large, I think most candidates do ask questions. Yes.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Let's picture this. You prepared, practiced. Maybe took the course. Maybe took the course by English for AT. We also recently launched the English for AT job interview crash course. So you are 100 prepared, right? You know how you're going to follow up. You know the interview process. You connected with some employees on LinkedIn, right? You are 99% prepared, but you're still not confident, right? You still break out in cold sweat. You know that you will do this during a job interview, right? You will panic. What are some tips maybe to prepare like that, to be self-confident, right? To avoid this self-doubt. Maybe listen to a uptight song, to optimistic song before a job interview or something else. So what do you recommend?
Mm. It's different for everyone, Julia. You know, I don't think that there's one key tip I'd give on this. So I'd more say, you know, when you've had similar situations in the past where you felt very nervous, you know, maybe you're sweating a little bit or whatever it might be, what did you do in those situations that makes you feel better, right? That makes you feel, you know, secure and confident kind of before you walk in.
Mhm.
Um, you know, my own kind of tips for like this is things that I would do is the night before, make sure you get a good night's sleep. You know, for
Okay.
me, it's not worthwhile staying up late and trying to study. It's actually better to start your preparation a few weeks in advance, but the night before, get a good night's sleep. Go to bed early if you can. You know, try and get as much sleep as you can. It's going to be a busy day when it comes to the interviews. Like it can be a bit exhausting when you go through it, especially if maybe you've got a day full of interviews. It's back to back, each of them 45 minutes long. Yeah, it's a long day, right? It's a long process. Some of the things that I do if I'm really struggling, doing some breathing exercises before I go in. You know, I can also go into meditation and stuff and talk about that, but again, it's different for everyone. But they'd be kind of my top two tips. Another thing I sometimes saw people do is they would get so nervous maybe that they wouldn't want to eat or to drink. It's very
Mhm.
important that we do that in the morning as well. So depending on what time your interview is going to be, have a good breakfast. You know, and make sure you're hydrated and just get the basics right. You know, once you do that, you probably will be okay once you go into the interview.
Yes, correct. Yeah, these are fantastic tips. This one that you all can see on the screen, and this one for self confidence. This is very important, just for every event, probably, right? Okay, great. Moving on then. I have also this interesting question. This question is from one of our English for AT students. It's about what do recruiters pay the most attention to when hiring candidates. So, what's number one thing, right, that you mention or that you notice, right, when you just started a job interview with a job candidate?
Yeah, really good question. So, in the initial stages, the focus is very much on the candidate's skills and experience relevant to the role and the requirements. So, in the majority of listings that I've seen on tech companies, you'll see kind of the job description, the responsibilities, and then minimum and preferred qualifications. And what the recruiter or sourcer or screener or hiring manager is doing is they're looking at the candidate's resume, relevant skills and experience, and kind of putting that against what we're looking for in terms of the minimum and preferred qualifications. So that's what they're doing at the initial stages of the process. During the interview process, recruiters are also looking at, you know, what's the candidate's interest in the company? What's their interest in the role? Are they asking any insightful questions, maybe? And also, what's their response time? You know, are they responding relatively soon, or maybe within, say 24 hours to emails, or if you're trying to set up a call, what was that experience like? You know, these little things do make a difference, and they do matter. And then in the latter stage, it's the interview performance and feedback. So once all the interviews are completed, we compile all the feedback, and together with the hiring manager, the recruiter will partner with them to determine, okay, which candidate do we want to move ahead with based on the interview performance and feedback. That is kind of one of the primary criteria that we look at.
All right. Okay. How about
Uh,
proofread your CV? That's interesting.
yes, So, top tip, proofread your CV. So, simple grammar and spelling mistakes, they don't look great on a CV. And I'll be honest with you, it was one of the things that I always saw, even with the CV that looked well. Maybe the format was great, and you could tell the person put a lot of work into it. There were some grammatical errors. So try as much as possible, proofread it. You can use spell check, for example, on Microsoft Word, on I think even Google Docs has it now, or simply maybe get a friend or family member just to do a read through it. And I'll be honest, I do the same thing myself. And my wife, thankfully, she's very, 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 very helpful with this, but she'll always spot something that doesn't look right, or maybe I'm missing a full stop or whatever. And these can make a huge difference. So that'll be my top tip for this slide.
Yeah, so use another pair of eyes, right? Just someone to help you and to read it for you. Okay, yeah, great. And we also know that, especially speaking about non-native English speakers, right, who want to land their job in an international company where it's only in English, for example, right, and they are not that advanced in English, right, they tend to use AI tools like ChatGPT to create a CV, right, or to proofread or to rewrite a CV, or sometimes to write a cover letter. Do you notice these cases when it's all generated by ChatGPT?
Um, I'll maybe say a couple of points on this, right? So number one, AI has come a long way in the last year and a half. So it
Mhm.
is, I've tried it just as a sample myself, just to see what result I would get, and even I was pretty impressed. So that's one point I make, is I think it has come a long way in the last year and a half, and it's a very powerful tool. And the second thing is that I think we do spot themes. So it
Yeah.
you know it can become clear, especially maybe if the person has just put it through the AI, like put it through ChatGPT, and just not looked at it afterwards. They've gotten it written up and they've just done copy and paste and sent it straight in. Usually there'll be a couple of sentences that maybe just don't make sense or don't quite add up, and you can clearly tell the person has probably used an AI tool. Um, so my advice would be, obviously, do whatever feels most comfortable. But maybe back to the top tip I gave, proofread it. Actually go through it and go, hold on, does that actually make sense? Right? Because sometimes the chat GPT and the Google Bard, sometimes they make mistakes, right? And sometimes it doesn't quite make sense. So that'd be my tip for that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. This is very interesting. And I'd like to stop on this first tip, right, or the first saying here, that the focus is on the candidate's experience and skills, right? So, what's more important? Let's say we have two candidates. The first candidate, candidate A, is a seasoned professional but with poor soft skills. And candidate B, the second one, is someone with little experience for this particular role, but this person is very motivated, this person is very excited, and this person has great soft skills, right? Communication skills. So who do you choose? Or can you choose between these two options?
So I'll maybe reverse this a little bit and say, what's the role that the candidates are applying for?
Oh,
Because that ultimately, I think, will kind of, that should be your guiding star, right? When you're trying to determine, okay, is this person a fit or are they not? So the soft skills which you mentioned, I know if it's maybe like a sales position, soft
mhm.
skills are going to be really,
All
right,
right.
like really, really important, even more so than maybe a role that doesn't have as much customer engagement. However, if you're talking about a software engineering role that really requires like that high level of technical ability in coding or maybe another technical area, we're probably going to focus on that as well. It's not to say that soft skills are not important, but it really does depend, I suppose, on the requirements for the role. Sorry if that's a bit of a complicated answer, Julia.
No, that's interesting. So if you're going to speak a lot, right, in your role as a manager, for example, HR manager, right, or again, sales manager, soft skills is the priority, right? So you still have chances, even if you don't have a lot of experience, right? You should have this developed soft skills. All right, interesting, very good. Thomas, if we look at the comments here, I'm going to show one.
Yes,
I hope that everyone can see it on the screen.
we have
Um,
some questions as
okay.
well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we can see Rocky saying that I'm Thomas Connection on LinkedIn. That's great. You have your friends here. Maybe this is
Yeah.
a great chance to remind everyone. 1 second, I'm going to switch to another slide. Okay. Do we guys
And
see
if
another one?
not just yet.
Not just yet.
While
Wow,
we're
that.
waiting for that, Julie, if you want, so Rocky has actually asked a question. So he
Okay,
said,
go
"Hi
ahead.
Thomas, when will you think Android dev jobs open in Google London?" So that's a really good question, Rocky. I'll maybe share two bits of information on this. So number one, and I did post this on my LinkedIn a while ago. I unfortunately have been part of the layoffs for Google, so so not too sure of the current situation. I do know that just from checking the careers website myself, there have been some roles which have popped up, but at this point, I'm not able to really advise on when these jobs may open up. But I would encourage you to use the careers website and also maybe set a reminder of some description, so that once a role does open up, you can get an email notification.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, everyone, feel free to ask questions here, give your comments or feedback, anything. We'll be happy to address your questions right at the moment as we go, or we also have a Q&A session at the end. So maybe you want to save your questions for a later time. Or maybe you have also some questions, even when you watch this as a recording, right? Make sure to reach out to Thomas on LinkedIn. This is his profile here. Maybe you want to take a screenshot at the moment just to get connected with Thomas. And because I know that Thomas regularly shares posts there, some job interview tips and tricks, right? Something about cover letters. And this is always very insightful. So consider being friends on LinkedIn, and consider joining our free community for job candidates who want to get their dream job. So maybe they want to find their buddies there, some friends. We regularly share memes about job interview processes. We regularly share some tips, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, so like do's and don'ts there. So again, consider joining Thomas and English Variety community here. Okay, should we get going? I guess I have two
Yes.
questions for you, and then we'll give it over to our audience. Again, this is very interesting to know what things are okay and what things are not okay to say during a job interview. When we were preparing for that, yeah, I also had one more question here to add, but now could you please share some top things that are taboo, right, to discuss or to mention? To mention.
Yes. So, one of the most common tips I give to candidates is the first point here, which is to avoid diving straight in when you're answering an interview question. So, don't make assumptions. Be curious. Ask questions to really understand, what you think the underlying problem is, and better as much as you can. If you dive straight in, it may look like you're making assumptions about the problem and potentially missing something. So being curious at the start, taking your time and asking those questions, and that can really help you to structure your thoughts better and give a much better answer. Next thing
Okay.
is, do not share any personal information that's not relevant to the job. So while it's important to build the rapport with the interviewer, candidate really should avoid sharing personal information that's not relevant to the job. And this can include details about their personal life, political views, religious beliefs, whatever it might be. That would be another thing to avoid during a job interview. The next thing then is negative comments about previous employers or colleagues. It's important to be professional and positive during an interview, but speaking negatively about previous employers or colleagues, it generally doesn't come across well, and it can make it look as if the candidate is maybe coming across a bit difficult to work with or potentially unprofessional. So try to avoid that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, we didn't put this on the slide, Julia, but I do have one thing to do. And it's the thing that we talked about a few minutes ago, which is asking questions. So, an interview process it's a two-way street, right? Yes, it's an opportunity for the company or the organization to get to know you better and assess whether or not you're a good fit for this position. But it's also a chance for you to ask questions, learn about the company, learn about the culture. it's an opportunity for you to see what you're getting into, see what working there is like, what the culture is like, how does the organization support their employees, what opportunities are there for career development, or what's the trajectory like. So these are great questions to ask, or great topics to ask during each of the interviews. So yeah, highly recommend doing that.
All right, so asking questions before, because if you don't ask, you didn't get it, right? You didn't get this information. And if you ask questions, you get, or you learn even more that you were planning actually to learn, right, from this event, for example. Yes, I totally agree here. But I have my question is about the second point here, sharing personal information. I know that some people, when they prepare their introductions, right, because this is usually number one question that a hiring manager, right, recruiter asks is, tell us about yourself. And this is where a job candidate thinks, should I include my information, personal information, something about my hobbies or interests that, shows myself as a personality, right? That shows that I can do something outside of work. So, do we have to include this information to our introductions?
I think that's very much up to yourself. I think it's okay to include some information, right? And especially in this context, I think, you know, sometimes I think the interviewer is asking maybe a bit of a warm up question. Tell me a bit
Mhm.
about yourself, or something like that. And I think in those cases, it's okay. When they ask that question, they're probably asking to know a little bit more about your professional life and your professional experience versus your personal life. I think it's okay to share some things. And I've seen, for example, on some CVs, people put down their hobbies. And I think that's okay as well. What I'd maybe avoiding is just kind of oversharing, and especially when it comes to the other things I've mentioned. So, political views and things like that, especially if somebody asks you directly. I don't think you should feel obliged to share that. But if you want to share it, I think that's totally up to you. It's totally up to the candidate.
All right, it's optional, just don't overshare it, right? Don't make it
Yeah.
on the first page in your CV as well. All right, so that makes sense. And I have another question. As most of our students are non-native English speakers, have you personally ever interviewed a non-native English speakers, right? What maybe are top three or top five mistakes that they should avoid, right, as non-native English speakers? For example, they don't make small talk in the beginning, right? This is very common for non-native English speakers, unfortunately, right? This is a cross-cultural context when some people they don't make small talk with an interviewer, or maybe it's about language mistakes. They can use limited vocabulary, right? They can say very good instead of exciting. They can say very boring instead of tedious, for example. So, what are top three mistakes that you personally noticed?
Oof. I don't know if I really have like a top three mistakes, right, when it comes to this, because um I think when it comes to a non-native English speaker, um, if, for example, like the first thing you mentioned is, what if they don't do small talk, right? My response to that it could be, well, they could be nervous, and I'd also say that English speakers also, it happens with them, with native English speakers.
Yeah.
So it's not just one; it happens with both, and they could just be nervous, right? It's very, very common that this happens. So I would, personally, I wouldn't read too much into that, right? That doesn't affect me too much. Um, um, what I'm then looking at, I suppose, when the candidate is relaying their answers to me, is, what am I looking for? Like, what are our expectations here? And how does the candidate's answers weigh up against what we expect? That's what I'm interested to know. I think if I know that maybe they're a non-native English speaker, yes, there will always maybe be some situations where they don't use a word maybe that I would use, but that doesn't make it wrong, right? So really, what I'm trying to do is really understand the true substance of what they're trying to say, instead of kind of honing in on one specific word or set of words, if that makes sense. So my advice would be, just do your best. I know for jobs in FAANG, generally speaking, I think the minimum accepted level of English, I think, is B2.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what we would advise people doing. If you can, try and go further than that, because it will make things easier. It's especially if you're dealing with a subject like say software engineer. It is one thing to have a conversation in English or in another language that's non-native, but then to try and talk in a very technical way about these subjects with minimal English, that's going to be difficult. So my advice would be try as much as you can to push along your English education, and get it to preferably a C level if you can.
All right, good plan. I love it. Love it, of course. Thank you. Right, we just covered things to avoid doing, right? And also, a few minutes ago, you shared this tip that it's important to follow up, right? To follow up right after a job interview. And here, another our student asked this interesting question: is it okay to follow up with a recruiter after getting rejected? And ask them because this question, why not me? So right, this is quite common. Of course, everyone wants to get the true or correct answer to this question, but is it okay to do it?
Yeah, this is very. I mean, the way this question is asked is very much yes, no in the response, right? Because you can see, I've gone through a few points, so apologies. But essentially, yes, it is okay.
Mhm.
However, it's good to focus on asking for interviewer feedback rather than why didn't they select you, right? Asking for feedback from the interviews, it shows you want to develop your skills, improve for future interviews. I recommend doing this after the process takes place. So once you go through it all and you're speaking maybe with the recruiter at the end, if they are saying to you, unfortunately, we did not proceed with you, at that point, I think it's good to ask for some feedback. Asking, why not me, or why didn't you progress with me? It generally won't yield any results. The recruiter and the hiring manager will most likely not share this with you. However, they will share, or well, they should share some feedback on how the interviews went and say, hey, look, if you're looking to improve for next time, here's
Mhm.
something I'd recommend based on the interview feedback. And I know one thing I did, if we were not moving ahead with a candidate, a recruiter has to remember that, okay, we're maybe not moving ahead with them now, but we could be in 12 months. It could be in 18 months, could be in 24 months. A lot of people come back, they do interviews again, or they do interviews for a different role. So, a good recruiter should know this, right? They should be keeping this in mind and thinking, we could definitely see this candidate coming back again, either for this position or something else. So, yeah, I think it's important that they have that feedback and that level of engagement in these situations, because they could very well be coming back again.
Yeah, and great news, maybe, right, for everyone here. That's correct and so spot on. Right, so it's about rephrasing this question, right? Not asking why not me. I guess that's the answer. This very, very popular book by Simon Sinek, who said, start with why. Maybe this is the only case where you don't need to start with why, yes, but you should rephrase your question here.
Agreed. And also, that's a great book for anyone that's not read it. I highly, highly recommend it.
Okay, well, maybe we're going to add it to the description after we end this live stream today. Right, okay. I think we have one question from Rocky. I can address it right here. Salary negotiation and job approval, are they inversely proportional? Interesting.
That's a good question. And also, Rocky, I don't mean to intervene, but I did also see another question just above this, Julia. So from Mr. Art, said they had a question on visa sponsorship. Would it be okay? Also, I just don't want to skip people if that's
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Okay, let's go there. Mhm.
Yeah. So what they've asked is it really interesting to hear about visa sponsorship? Is it still relevant in FAANG companies? Do they hire staff from abroad? I guess the simple answer is yes. Like typically speaking, and I know most of the companies, they'll work with a third party who will actually kind of look after the immigration process. Usually in these cases, in some cases, a candidate needs to meet certain requirements in order to get this, to get a visa or to get a sponsorship. So, for example, I believe like in Switzerland, you either need to come from, I think, an EU country or be an EU citizen, or you need to meet other requirements in terms of a bachelor's degree and years of work experience, regardless of whether or not Google is actually going to sponsor you. So I think my answer is yes, it still is relevant and it still is happening, and we're still hiring from abroad from what I can see.
All right. And where should we find more information about it?
That's a good question. You know, I think the scope of this is quite wide, because depending, I suppose, on the country that the candidate is interested in working in and the nationality of that candidate, there can be many different scenarios. So my advice would be, have a look at, okay, where is it you might like to work in terms of those countries, and what are the processes that you need to go through, if any, in order to work in that country as a citizen of your current country, right? And really get to know that a little bit more, just so that you understand it yourself. And I believe, yeah, there should be plenty of information about this on the website. If you do get to the point where you're discussing it with the recruiter and going through the process, they will also maybe discuss this a little bit more with you. And I'd encourage candidates to openly, discuss it with the recruiter as well.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
That was very interesting and insightful. Thanks a lot. Maybe let's go with another question and then move forward. Then this one from Rocky now.
So yes, so salary negotiation and job approval. So by job approval, Rocky, I'm going to just maybe ask you a quick follow-up question here. Do you mean that you as a candidate have been approved for a particular job, or that the company, like the hiring committee, maybe has approved you, or what do you mean by job approval exactly? Sorry, just so I understand better.
All right. Yeah. And here, maybe I also have kind of question about salary negotiation. Who should start talking about salary during a job interview? Does a recruiter need to start this, topic, or does a candidate have to start speaking or asking about salary?
So good question. So one thing I'm seeing more and more of recently is around in the job descriptions that salary ranges are being included now. Now, it's not the case for every country and not the case for every single role, but generally it's becoming more of an accepted practice. And I think this is fantastic. It is fantastic for the company because they're openly sharing it, right? And they're saying, hey, this is our kind of range, more or less. But it also is saying to the candidate, here's what we're going to pay, and the candidate is then able to decide for themselves, is this a match for what I'm looking for or not, before they apply, right? That clarity and that transparency, I think, is really important. To answer your question directly, Julia, both sides. If it's a good recruiter, they should be asking this in the first call. It was usually, like, if we were going to start a process, it's usually one of the questions I would ask, because you just need to know, hey, what is the person's expectations before we start the process? If there is a complete divergence in terms of expectations, it may not be appropriate to move ahead. And therefore, in both cases, we're saving time, energy, especially on the candidate side, where they might be preparing for a long time for these interviews, and committing to a process that takes 4, 5, 6 weeks. So I would say both, and as early on in the process as possible. You shouldn't feel the need to share your current compensation, but you should be clear on, these are my expectations, right? Because they differ for everyone, right? And also tech companies, and especially ones that are listed on the stock exchange, they will have salary ranges and structures that include different components: base salary, bonus, maybe some allowances, stock. And again, you need to take the time to really understand this and say, is that a fit for me, right? So again, as earlier on the process you can do this, ultimately, the better it is.
Yeah, so you should expect discussing salary during your first job interview, if it is a good recruiter, right? And if it is a good job interview. And here, Rocky is asking more salary makes less ability to get a job, like less chance, right? To get a job if you are asking more salary, like higher salary. Is it true? Is it so?
I mean, Rocky, if if I'm going to go into an interview process and I tell the recruiter I want a 500,000 Swiss francs salary, which is totally not what I would be getting, that's probably not going to be a fit, right? So I'd say before we even get to job approval, the recruiter and I will probably say, do you know what, this isn't a fit, right? So my advice here would be think to yourself, okay, here's maybe my current compensation or of my last job. This is what I was getting. This is what I'm on and or was on. And here's my expectations. Here's what I'm kind of going for. I would also recommend doing a bit of research into the market. So most of the tech companies, they will look at the markets they operate in and understand what is the salary ranges within the industry. And then they will make their own ranges off the back of those. So they know they are being competitive. Some of this
Yeah.
information you can find on the internet. I know, for example, Glassdoor will have some information. So
Mhm.
try and do a little bit of research yourself and understand a bit more. Even if you know people at the company as well, it might be an opportunity for you to say, hey, you don't need to share me your salary information, but I'd love to know how do they approach it in the company. Here's my expectations. Is that too high? Generally speaking, Rocky, I think with most recruiters and processes, there can be a little bit of flexibility, to try and be competitive. And that's why I think the salary ranges are important in the job descriptions, because it does show where on the spectrum they're willing to go. But if it's something that is way and above and beyond that, then I would say probably not. It probably will not be a good match in that case, and the recruiter will say maybe it doesn't make sense to move ahead. So Rocky, I'm sorry if that's a long-winded answer, but hopefully it gives you some clarity, and I'm happy to discuss it maybe offline if you want to as well.
Yeah, okay. So it's about do your research, do your homework, right? Prepare this information so you know that you're going to discuss it. Right. One more question. We haven't even started the Q&A session. Maybe that's the right time here. We have this
Yeah.
question from Miguel here. Is there a chance to learn more English in the companies if I'm selected for my technical skills, but I need to improve my English? Well, if you may, right, I can maybe start here. I can say that it's all about workforce development training. This is what English for IT does for tech companies, for global tech companies, and this is fantastic because many tech companies, they care about their employees development, they care about their English proficiency, right, they care about their soft skills. That's why because they understand that it makes their employees more engaged, more motivated to work, right? Because they study, they also learn something, and happier. Also, by the way, in the same book that we just mentioned a few minutes ago, I remember Simon Sinek said once that happy employees, they go home more happier, right? And they have happier families even. Can you imagine that? So it all starts from work, and it all starts again from this workforce development training. Everything that your company offers you, right? Like these perks. So again, Thomas, maybe about Google, right? Is there a chance to learn more English at Google, for example, right? To
Yeah.
improve your English?
I can't call it a specific scenario here, so apologies here, Miguel. But I would say, just from reading some stuff on the internet, I do see a lot of tech companies offering some opportunities in this area. Obviously, it depends and it varies, especially if it's something, the question would need to be asked, like, is it job related or is it maybe not job related, like something for personal use? If it is job related, I actually would kind of track back a little bit and say, well, what was the interview performance like, and was the individual actually able to show a good enough level of the English language to answer the questions? And by the way, I'm assuming that this would be for a company whose primary language is English. Right? It's not always going to be the case, depending on maybe what company you apply for. But if we're talking maybe about these companies, English is the main language, right, in those situations. So yeah, so I would say just keep that in mind as well. But by and large, I do see some initiatives within this space, Miguel.
Yeah, correct, of course. So even if your level is B2 already, there is still room for improvement, right? To have this native like English, right? And this is where you can learn with a company that definitely, usually, or most often provides you with this opportunity. All right, great. Finally, before we start the Q&A session, I also wanted to talk or to tell you about our job interview crash course, which is also a great way to improve your English, improve your soft skills, or at least prepare for a job interview. If you have, let's say, 2 weeks before your job interview, right? This is still a great time, a big, in 14 days, right, to prepare for a job interview. And this is why we created this particular course, because only 2 weeks and you can prepare, which is the most important. You can practice on our platform with our mentors. You can practice answering the most common questions. By the way, I'm going to ask Tomas what are the maybe top 3 most common questions that every recruiting manager asks like all the time. So we picked 14 questions that are very, very common, and you can practice it with us, with our mentors on the platform, right, which is very interactive to get your dream job after a successful job interview. And if you're really interested in the course, maybe you just want to take a screenshot at the moment to check it later after our meeting here, just make sure you saw and noticed the promo code, which works only for you as you watch the stream at the moment or as a recording. This promo code DreamJob50 guarantees 50% discount on this particular course on our website. Just enter the promo code and you'll get it with the discount here. And not only that, not only practicing questions, most common questions, but also improving your English, improving your communication skills if you're not native English speaker, right? Together with the course, together with the platform, you'll get free speaking clubs every week, even after you finish the course, even after you complete it and get your certificate. By the way, you can also show your certificate right on LinkedIn, post it, or even add it to your CV as a certificate of excellence after you finish this course. Also, we provide our students with free webinars. Very similar to this one, right? But only for our community that are once a month. And we have a huge community of our students that support each other, that share their knowledge, share their experience with each other, which is really, really helpful in a private chat, right? And as I just mentioned, you have a chance to get our English for IT certificates that are NFT certificates on blockchain that you can even post on your LinkedIn as a reward. So that was about our job interview crash course. If interested, you can even talk to me on LinkedIn, for example, and I'll be happy to answer more questions about this course. But now I'd be happy to see your questions. I'm sure that Tomas is ready to answer your questions about how to land a dream job in FAANG. Right? So let's give it 5 or maybe 2 minutes to see if someone has any questions about job interviews.
And Julia, there
Um,
was a question also just from Dennis as well. He asked, will there be a video recording?
oh, sure, right
Yeah,
there on YouTube. Exactly.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So yes, Dennis, there
Confirm
will be a
the
video recording.
question.
Yeah.
Good. Thomas, while we are waiting for your questions or maybe feedback, maybe some comments here from our audience. So could you tell me what are your three favorite questions that you always ask every job candidate? Maybe some tricky questions, you know.
I'm maybe I'm a bit more laid back, or I was as a recruiter. You know, my first question is, how are you doing? How's your week going? Right. I
Okay.
want to put the candidate at ease, right? And I want to get to know them just a little bit more. I don't want to dive straight in rather to business, right? So that's usually something I would do. And I want to also get to know them just a bit better. Um, the other question I tend to ask are around, tell me something that's not in your CV,
I
right?
love
So
it.
usually,
Great.
yeah, usually with the CV, I've used this, or I've heard of this expression or this analogy where it's supposed to be a fishhook, right? It's meant to have little pieces there for the recruiter so they can catch on to it. take it in, and then dig deeper, right? Really understand a bit more. So I usually ask, like, tell me about a project or something that's not on your CV, right? That's relevant here. Um, the next thing I'll usually do is ask them a bit more about, where are you looking to get to? So I don't expect them to have a 10-year plan, but I would like to know a bit more around, what are you passionate about, and is this actually a fit with what we are potentially offering with this position? So that's something else I think. They'd be my maybe three top questions which I'd ask.
Okay, of course, there are more questions during every job interview. That's interesting to count how many questions are raised, right, during one
Yeah.
session. Great. Okay, so perfect. I guess we have 2 minutes to answer some questions here. They are quite short but interesting. Will watching video content in English help to learn English? Sure thing, right? Because you're in this way you immerse into English, into this environment, and you boost your speaking skills. Not speaking, but listening, right? Listening skills at first. So of course that helps, and of course this is important to do. And the final one is about working for Google. So Tomas, this is up to you.
Yeah, and also Dennis, just the point you made on watching video content in English. So I'm actually learning German at the moment. I have like an okay, like ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, but I've actually found, similar to what you've asked here, and similar to Julia's point, watching some content in German can be or listening, sorry, some content in German can be really helpful. So I fully support that. Miguel, so Thomas, how long have you been working in Google? How was your experience in that company? So I worked at Google for 10 years, or about 10 and a half years. And Miguel, as I said earlier on the live stream, so I did unfortunately get laid off. And this is actually my last month. So at the end of this month, that'll be it for me at Google, unfortunately. My experience covers mostly HR and recruitment positions. So I've done a mix of both really throughout my time. Probably more lopsided on the recruitment side, and more on kind of the tech side. So I was a recruiter for some of the engineering teams like SRE, cloud support, network operations, and then most recently I was actually people managing and leading a team of recruiters to hire for specific business areas. I hope that gives you enough of a summary, Miguel, but do let me know if you have more questions.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for today. It was wonderful to have you with us today. I
Julia,
guess,
I don't mean to interrupt, but there's one final question here from Rocky. Do we have
of
time for that,
course.
or do we have to end it a
Yeah,
bit
sure.
early?
Okay, yeah, sure. Even if
Yeah.
someone has questions after they watch it as a recording, right? Feel free to ask your questions right under the video, and I'll be happy, or Thomas will be happy, right, to give you some answers there. Okay, so let's find it.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good
Recruiter.
question, Rocky. So, yeah, recruiter versus recruiting lead versus recruiting manager. What's the difference between them? Are hiring, recruiting the same? So, generally speaking, yes, hiring and recruiting are the same, right? I think they're just different ways of describing it. There could be some small differences, Rocky, but generally speaking, it means the same thing. A recruiter, by and large, they are going to be the folks that are doing kind of the real day-to-day work, right? So actually hiring candidates, right? Talking to them, sending them through the process, and then ultimately hiring them. A recruiting lead, I think, is kind of like a first line or first level manager. And they're usually in charge of like a particular hiring area that could include maybe managing some other recruiters or partnering with some other recruiters, but generally it's something that's maybe a little bit more senior than the recruiter. And then a recruiting manager is really is not doing very much kind of day-to-day recruiting themselves, but instead people managing a team of recruiters, right, and helping them to achieve whatever goals it is that they're setting out. I know, Rocky, this also depends a little bit on what recruiters maybe call themselves on LinkedIn. So you'll see a lot of different job titles, but generally speaking, that's kind of the differences between the job titles.
Yeah, and just some responsibilities, right? They differ. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think we answered everything. No questions. Just some
Yeah.
fire emojis here. It means that someone found our talk show today helpful, probably. Feel free to share your feedback, your comments. We highly appreciate it. And Tomas, again, I want to say thank you for coming. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for allocating 1 hour to English for AT, to our community, that you shared very interesting, very helpful, real life tips how to land a job interview in FAANG. So hopefully someone will reach out to you on LinkedIn and will say that they now got this job in FAANG right after a successful job interview. Thank you so much for today. Okay, thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Julia. Right, so yes, we're going to end broadcast at the moment, but it's going to be saved directly here on YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, everyone, for participating and in watching. Take care, everyone, and bye-bye for now.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thanks.